Hey guys, so we've been talking a lot about the view did load or view will appear or view did disappear, which are some of the methods that you saw only just in the last lesson. But we haven't really learnt much about these. So in this lesson, I want to talk about the life cycle methods of a view controller. And just as we humans are born and we eventually die, so do view controllers. And they have a life cycle with certain key moments that we can tap into, and we can write code to specify what should happen in those moments. The first thing that happens is the view gets loaded up. So in this case, all of the IB outlets, IB actions, all of the view related objects gets connected up and is now accessible. Now it's really important to note that the viewDidLoad method is only called once when the view is created, whereas the next method that we'll see in the lifecycle can get called many times. So after the view has been loaded up, then the next thing that the operating system will call is viewWillAppear. And this is called just before the view actually shows up on the screen. So the user's not yet able to see anything, but it is, however, a good time point for us to be able to hide or show certain UI components, like what we did in our FlashChat app when we hid the navigation bar. Because the user is not yet able to detect any changes in the view, and it's only when the next step gets called, which is view did appear, are they able to actually see things on the screen. And at this point, if you tap into this method, then the view is already on screen and the user is already able to see the view controller. So this is a good time point to, for example, start a countdown timer if you were going to do that on the screen, or start an animation, anything that the user can detect, basically. Now, after view did appear, the user might do something to trigger the next method, which is view will disappear. Say, for example, if they navigated back or if they somehow dismissed this current view controller, then this is the first method that's going to be called to allow you to write some code to prepare for this event. So, for example, you probably want to stop your animations and you might want to change the appearance of UI. Say, for example, like when we hid our navigation bar. Now, the step after view will disappear is, of course, view did disappear. And at this point, the view is already off the screen. And this is basically the last moment where we get to change anything about that previous view before it disappears off the screen. Now, just because the view has disappeared, it doesn't mean that it has been deallocated or has been deleted from the memory of the phone. And in fact, as you'll see in the next demonstration, the view did disappear literally just means that the user can't see it. It doesn't say anything about whether if the view controller is going to be destroyed or if it's just going to be kept in the background in the navigation stack. So I've created a really simple example where I've added all of these possible methods that we can override, from viewDidLoad to viewDidDisappear. And I've added a print statement in each of them to show you when they get called. And I've linked up a second view controller, which basically has the same code, all of those lifecycle methods, but instead it says ViewController2 viewDidLoad called. So this allows us to have a real-time view as to which of these methods are being called when. Now, if we take a quick look at the main.storyboard, you can see that it's a really simple interface. It's just got two view controllers, ViewController1 and ViewController2. And the first one has a button which has a segue that navigates to the second one. And on the second screen, I've got a back button, which then calls the dismiss method, which allows us to go back to ViewController1. And it will destroy and dismiss this second view controller. So let's go ahead and run our app and see what's being called when. Now, let me just go ahead and expand this area so you can see the order of things. The first thing that happens is on VC1, viewDidLoad gets called, and then view will appear, and then view did appear. Now it's going to hold still until the user performs some sort of action. So for example, I might click on the next button, which is going to take me to the second view controller. Now in this case, the ViewController 2 gets loaded up, and then view will appear and view did appear gets called. And finally, when I click on back, what will happen is that the view will disappear and view did disappear will get called from the second ViewController. Now you might be wondering, well, why is view did disappear or view will disappear not being called from VC1? Well, it's because when we navigate over, the segue is set up in such a way that our view controllers are displayed like cards, one on top of each other. So in fact, that previous view controller hasn't really disappeared, right? And all it's doing is just hiding there in the background, and it hasn't fully disappeared. Now you'll notice that as soon as I click on this second view controller and start pulling it down, view controller will disappear gets called in preparation for the event where view controller 2 is going to disappear. But if I was to go here and I was to change this segue, so from the default show to a present modally, and then change the presentation type to full screen so that the second view completely covers the previous view, and that view controller 1 actually does in fact disappear from the phone. So let's run this as it is now. And again, we get view did load, view will appear, view did appear. But now notice how once the second view controller is fully covering the previous view controller, we're getting view will disappear being called, and eventually the VC1's view did disappear gets called once it can no longer be seen. Notice how if I keep going back and forth between these two view controllers, we're getting this VC1 view will appear and view did appear being called many times, right? And that's because it does appear and disappear quite a few times, but you'll notice that the view did load for VC1 only gets called once, and that's the first time it gets loaded up. And that's because it's always living there in the background. It's not getting destroyed, it's just being covered. Whereas when I click back on the second view controller, it is in fact getting destroyed and it is disappearing for good instead of just hiding out somewhere. Now, this brings us to an interesting point and a really common source of confusion. Say, for example, because we have this segue that goes between the next button on VC1 over to VC2, if I was to go into ViewController 1 and add a prepare for segue method, then this is going to get triggered as soon as that segue happens. So let's create a destination VC from the segue.destination property, and we're going to downcast it as a ViewController 2. Now, if this is at all confusing, just be sure to take a look back at the previous lessons where we covered the segues and downcasting in more detail. So now that I've got hold of a reference to the destination view controller, which is basically going to be a ViewController 2 type, notice how here I've got an IB outlet that's linked to a UI label, and that corresponds to this label right here. Well, what if I wanted to prepare for segue by tapping into this destination VC and setting its label to have a text of hello? So let's go ahead and run this code, and I wonder if you can predict what happens. So we've got our standard view did load, view will appear, view did appear being called, and now as soon as I click next, it triggers the segue, and it should, if our code was working, it should try to set that destination VC's label. And you can see right here that this destination VC is a ViewController 2 data type, and it is a living, breathing object. But at this point in time, that UI label has still not been created, and nor has it been linked up to the view controller. So if I try to run this code, I actually get a fatal error and a crash. And it's because it found nil when it was trying to access that label. This is why the ViewDidLoad method is really useful, and we use it so much in our iOS development. It's because this time point inside these curly brackets, if you decide to write some code that's related to the view, say a label or a button or anything that's on screen, you are guaranteed that it has already been set up and created. If you were to write label.text equals hello, then you are guaranteed that this will not fail, because at this time point, the view has already loaded up, and that means that label is available for you to change. So I've included this project as a GitHub repository in the course resources page. So if you wanted to download it and have a play around with it, then feel free to do so. Alternatively, you can also just create these methods yourself. It doesn't take too long, but if you want to save yourself a bit of time, it's also there for you as well.